Hello, today we're going to be talking about Blasted and 4.48 Psychosis, which are the first and last works by Sarah Kane. Sarah Kane was an experimental British playwright who published 5 plays over the course of her short life, as well as a couple of articles for The Guardian and a screenplay for a short film before committing suicide at the age of 28 in 1999. Sarah Kane is a divisive figure in theater, contemporary theater, experimental theater, because she explores some very taboo ideas and themes in her work, including sexuality, death, murder, war, the idea of identity. And her early works, including Blasted, are marked with a very strong, graphic violence. She was unofficially associated with what was known as in-your-face theater, which were a collection of British playwrights who sort of aggressively attacked these taboo issues and were highly divisive within the theater community. We'll start with Blasted, which was published in 1994, and it follows primarily the couple of Ian and Kate as they hide in a hotel room in Leeds during some unnamed civil war that rages on outside. I'm assuming this is a civil war, but it's never really discussed in the play itself. Now, Ian is 45 years old. He's an alcoholic. He's a chain smoker who's missing a lung. He is racist, he is xenophobic, he's homophobic, he's all around just a really awful person. And he is romantically involved with Kate, who is 21 years old. She's 24 years younger than him. She is extremely delicate and sensitive, and she's prone to fainting spells when she is exposed to too much stress or pressure, which Ian places upon her quite frequently in the play. She passes out on a number of occasions. So the first act of the play, which is divided into 5 acts, is essentially just getting to know Ian and Kate as characters, learning just how terrible of a person Ian is and how mismatched he and Kate seem to be. In the second act, which takes place the following morning, things sort of pick up a little bit. Near the end of the second act, there's an explosion which literally blasts the hotel room apart. Now, Kate is taking a shower when this explosion occurs, and Ian is sort of alone in the hotel room. And Kate sort of disappears after the explosion. It later comes to light that she crawled out of a bathroom window while the shower was running. The room is then, I guess, sort of invaded by this soldier who comes in from the outside, who's obviously fighting in this civil war. The soldier comes in and begins to talk to Ian and just sort of starts unloading all of this psychological trauma that he's experienced as a soldier of war, and the sort of unspeakable acts that he's seen performed on women and children by members of his own army, by members of the opposing army. He discusses in great length the traumas that were delivered to his girlfriend by the opposing army, and these are the traumas of war that occur in every war and have throughout human history. He tells stories of rape and genital mutilation and just general corporeal mutilation, just mutilation of the body. And as he's unloading all this, Ian becomes, uncomfortable, of course. There's a complete 180 of Ian's character, where he goes from being this dominant, aggressive force with Kate to being this quiet and submissive force. Near the very end of Ian and the soldier's interaction, there are a couple very intense, violent scenes, one of a sexual nature and one of a physical nature, that occur before the soldier leaves the play. In the 5th scene, we have Ian, who's sort of alone, and he's changed in a way because of what the soldier did to him, in what the soldier said to him, as well as the acts that the soldier performed upon him. But Kate is also very much important. She comes back in the fifth act. She has found a child out there in the rubble, basically a newborn. And she spends the majority of the fifth act going out trying to find food for this child and food for Ian, who is not capable of leaving the apartment under his own power anymore because of what happened to him. And Ian has the last line in the play, and it's significant because it's such a departure of character for him, which is why I think you can make the case that Blasted is the story of Ian, the alcoholic, chain-smoking, racist, slowly coming around to an uncomfortable realization about himself and the world, and having to come to terms with the fact that the world is not entirely how he viewed it before, with this really grim, dark, nihilistic understanding of how people operate. I wouldn't call Blasted a redeeming play because there are very, very few redeeming moments. It's typical of Sarah Kane's work. No one gets saved in a Sarah Kane play. Characters, at least in Blasted and 4.48 Psychosis, they are no more better off at the end of the play than they were at the beginning of the play. They're just in a different spot. So, moving from Blasted to 4.48 Psychosis is interesting because when you bookend an author or playwright's career with their debut and their final works, it's interesting to sort of see the changes that happen along the way. The immediate thing that strikes you reading 4.48 Psychosis as opposed to reading Blasted is that there is almost no structure to speak of, whereas Blasted is arranged into 5 scenes with very specific scene settings and scene directions and dialogue cues and characters, and there's this real linear sense of time, beginning, middle, end. You get none of that in 4.48 Psychosis. It is a far more experimental play. There are no characters in 4.48 Psychosis, none with a name. There are no dialogue cues in 4.48 Psychosis. There's no real sense of linearity, of, narrative forward movement. There's no narrative cohesion. There's a bunch of small, fragmented pieces in this play that are all sort of strung together. And I'm not sure you can even really call it a play if it weren't for the fact that there are a couple of moments of stage direction in dialogue. The only stage direction I think you get is a silence, or a long silence, or a very long silence. You're essentially inside the mind of a severely, severely clinically depressed person who is coming to terms with the fact that they want to take their own life. The character, the narrator, if you want to call it that, of 4.48 Psychosis reveals in the opening lines that she, or he, I'll say she, the narrator says she intends to hang herself at 4:48 a.m. in comparison to Blasted, which was much more raw, visceral, angry violence, of a physical nature. 4.48 Psychosis's violence is entirely mental. It's entirely within the mind of this narrator, and it's all the darker for it. It's not a light read. As I said when I was talking about Blasted, Sarah Kane does not write happy plays. She did not write happy plays. You're not going to walk away from 4.48 Psychosis feeling better about yourself or having any sort of improved opinions on the world and on life or people in general. it's just dark. It's pitch black. She is experiencing this very real schism between her mind and her body, where she's never felt like they were truly one cohesive unit. She's always felt like her mind and her body are separate, and she hates her body, and she hates that she can't reconcile mind and body, and she feels like her mind is just crawling with cockroaches. There's talk about just being a slimy, filthy, dirty creature. And then she takes these medications, and the play takes a turn where instead of these paragraph-long rants, if you would, she's reduced herself to a handful of syllables. She's become a lot more inert and docile, and that anger is still there, that raw anger against everyone and everything, the anger at herself and at her doctors and at her friends and at God. It's still there, but it's just more subdued. It probably won't come as a surprise to you to know that by the end of the play, the narrator has all but basically said to the audience, this is it, goodbye. And it's hard to read 4.48 Psychosis and not be aware of the fact that Sarah Kane did kill herself before it was performed. It's hard to analyze that play without thinking about that, just because so much raw emotion is stuffed into this play that you can only help, you can't help but feel like it's autobiographical, that Sarah Kane is essentially writing, as one critic put it, a suicide note, and that 4.48 Psychosis is that suicide note. Now, Sarah Kane, as I said in the beginning, has her detractors because of the way she approached the topics that she wanted to discuss. You'll often find people saying that she has scenes of gratuitous violence in her plays, that she has, she uses violence sort of for its own sake, that she's just reveling in the shock value of a truly graphic depiction of a rape or sodomy. I don't agree with the idea that Sarah Kane is including these scenes of graphic violence just to revel in their shock value and just to get a rise out of her audience. I think the violence is definitely allegorical. I think it's metaphorical. It carries weight behind itself. It's either moving the plot forward, or it is directly changing a character in a way that is necessary to the structure of the piece. Every bit of violence that you see carries a certain kind of meaning to it. At no point do I think in any of the scenes in Blasted are you reading a depiction of violence that is existing for its own sake. It's there because it's serving the larger purpose of what Sarah Kane is trying to discuss in the piece. I don't think it's controversial to say that Blasted is a strongly anti-war play, that one of its fundamental functions is to critique the idea of war, the necessity of war, and it does that by exploring, unapologetically the horrors of war. 4.48 Psychosis, on the other hand, that's a bit harder to say it's good or it's not good, just because of how personal it feels. The narrator's qualms about things like sexuality and one's place in society and love and fear and pain, they seem to really come from within Sarah Kane. Like it does have that sort of raw, direct person to paper feel. It doesn't feel like she's trying to channel this through a specific narrator. It does in many ways, unfortunately, feel like a suicide letter. What's interesting is the narrator in 4.48 Psychosis says that a lot of her suffering and grief comes from loss, from the loss of love. And she addresses at some points the idea that she has lost a lover, or that she has never truly felt loved in this world, that she has loved, but she's never felt that love return to her. She directly confronts God and literally says, "Fuck you, God, for making me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist." And that sort of takes you into, I guess, one of the biggest detractions from people who've read 4.48 Psychosis, other than its complete lack of any kind of formal structure. You'll get arguments that it's self-indulgent and that it's edgy. And, I mean, there's some credence to that. It's Sarah Kane attempting to put into words the thought process of someone who is suicidally depressed. And you sort of follow this narrator in a roundabout, scattered, haphazard sort of way as she goes from being severely depressed to deciding she's going to kill herself to presumably the final moments before she actually does. You're not going to walk away from it feeling happy or redeemed in any sense, because the narrator certainly isn't redeemed. The narrator has regained a sense of control in deciding that she is going to kill herself, and she had lost that sense of control earlier when her psychiatrist prescribed her with this cocktail of drugs. And so to sort of regain that power empowers the narrator, and you get that as the play progresses. But ultimately, when you're talking about the plays of Sarah Kane, I think you notice that Sarah Kane is very interested in exploring the relationship between pain and love, and how much of one we're willing to endure for the sake of the other, how much pain we are willing to go through to feel love. And in Blasted, that is a question that is answered. You know, Ian and Kate and the soldier, they all go through pain for the sake of love. They all experience pain, and they all experience love. It's a question and an answer. How much pain are people willing to endure and still go back to another person because of that feeling they have with that other person? And you get that answer in Blasted. That answer does not exist in 4.48 Psychosis. It is just page after page after page of pain with no relief. There's pain, but there's no love. There's that absence and that void. But at the end of the day, I am glad that I read them both. So the question becomes, could I recommend the works of Sarah Kane, specifically Blasted and 4.48 Psychosis, to you? And I think I could, with a couple of caveats, of course. One being, as I've said again and again in this video, Sarah Kane does not write happy plays. She does not write plays with any real sense of redemption. She writes very dark, very cynical, and yet oddly poetic works. If you're at all interested in experimental theater, contemporary theater, if you want to explore the limits of what a play can be, if any of that appeals to you, I think you would definitely enjoy Blasted and or 4.48 Psychosis. And that is my debut review. Thank you very much for stopping by, for clicking on the video, for lending me your ear for however long this video winds up being. Thanks.